The chainsaw roared before I even made it off the ladder. I turned just in time to see the blade bite straight into my Christmas tree, the one my father planted before he died. Two men blocked me as if I were trespassing, and standing behind them calm and smiling in my own backyard was the HOA president. "I told you I'd handle it," she said, watching the tree crack and lean. I called 911. She didn't care. She already knew the police wouldn't arrive in time. When the tree finally hit the ground, she leaned in and whispered, "You can call a lawyer if you want, but I'm the law here." What she didn't know was that under California law, she had just ruined her life. Sandra Whitfield was the HOA president of Cedarbrook Heights, a gated suburban community where she'd held that title for 12 straight years. No breaks, no challengers, just one woman, one clipboard, and a board that never questioned her decisions. Sandra Whitfield didn't knock. She didn't ask permission. She didn't even hesitate. She walked straight through my side gate and into my backyard like she'd done it 100 times before. She stopped in front of the tree stump, adjusted her designer sunglasses, and spoke without looking at me. "Bylaw 7.3, she said. "Your tree obstructed a protected sightline. I sent you a notice. You ignored it." I told her I never received anything. I told her the tree was on my private property. I told her HOA bylaws didn't give her the right to step foot in my yard, let alone destroy something I owned. That's when she finally turned to face me. "I've been enforcing these rules longer than you've lived here," she said calmly. "I know exactly what I'm allowed to do." Then she turned away from me, dismissed me completely, and addressed the tree crew instead. "Finish the job." That was how Sandra operated. She didn't argue. She didn't threaten. She simply acted because, for over a decade, no one in Cedarbrook Heights had ever stopped her. As she walked back toward her Mercedes, she glanced over her shoulder once. "You'll save yourself a lot of trouble if you let this go." At the time, I thought she was talking about HOA fines. I didn't realize she was covering up something that could cost her everything. The police arrived at exactly 7:45 a.m. By then, my backyard didn't look like a place where Christmas was coming. It looked like a work site that had already moved on. The tree was gone. Not trimmed, not reduced, gone. All that remained was a jagged stump, surrounded by shattered ornaments, broken light strands, and fresh pine needles scattered across the lawn like debris after an explosion. The patrol car pulled up, slow lights off. One officer stepped out, hands already resting on his belt like he'd decided how this would end before he even walked up the driveway. "She's still around?" he asked. I shook my head. He walked the yard without urgency, snapping photos of the stump, the snapped wires, the chainsaw marks still wet with sap. He scribbled a few notes, then straightened up. "This is a civil matter," he said. "HOA disputes usually are." I asked him how it could be civil when someone walked onto my property without permission and destroyed something I owned. He shrugged. "You'll need a lawyer." That was the extent of it. No citation. No call to Sandra. No attempt to identify who authorized the crew. The officers left as quietly as they'd arrived. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. An email notification. HOA letterhead. Clean formatting. Sandra Whitfield's name typed neatly at the bottom. Reminder, please remove remaining tree debris within 7 days to avoid further penalties for aesthetic violation. I stared at the screen, rereading it slowly, like maybe I was missing something. She trespassed. She ordered the destruction of my property. And now she was fining me for the stump her crew had created. That evening, I came home to find a printed notice taped directly to my mailbox. Same language, same deadline, same threat. It wasn't rage that hit me then. It was understanding. Sandra didn't argue with people. She didn't threaten them directly. She applied pressure quietly and waited for them to fold. Most people never made it past this stage. Standing alone in my backyard, as the light faded, staring at the stump, I realized she expected me to do what everyone else did. Clean it up, pay the fine, move on. On December 16th, I sent a formal email to the HOA board. I kept my tone professional and restrained. No accusations, no emotion. I requested 3 documents, the 30-day notice Sandra claimed she'd sent, the full text of bylaw 7.3, and the meeting minutes approving my tree's removal. I hit send and waited. By December 18th, I had received nothing. No acknowledgement, no denial. Not even an automated response. What arrived instead was another violation notice. Violation #204 to 1,247, failure to comply with tree removal procedures. Fine, $500. Administrative fee, $200. Total due, $700. Sandra hadn't ignored my request. She'd escalated. The monthly HOA meeting took place on December 19th at the community center. 15 residents sat in folding chairs beneath fluorescent lights, while Sandra presided from the front table, flanked by 2 board members who barely spoke. She ran the meeting fast. Too fast. Questions were cut off after 2 minutes. Motions passed without discussion. When someone asked about landscaping expenses, Sandra smiled tightly. Submit a written request. Reviewed within 60 business days. When open forum began, I stood. I want to discuss the removal of my tree on December 14th. Sandra didn't look up. That matter was resolved under Bylaw 7.3. Next item. I stayed standing. I never received notice. You entered my property without permission. That's when she finally looked at me. Her expression wasn't anger. It was impatience. I've been president of this HOA for 12 years, she said calmly. I know these bylaws better than you ever will. This meeting is not for personal grievances. And just like that, she moved on. No vote, no discussion. The room stayed silent. Everyone there understood the rule. Pushing back only made things worse. On December 22nd, I hired a certified arborist. William Hartley arrived just after 9 in the morning, the kind of man who spoke slowly and precisely, as if every word mattered. He circled the stump for nearly an hour, measuring the diameter, photographing the cut, counting growth rings, running his hand over the exposed wood, like a doctor examining a wound. When he finished, he sat across from me at my kitchen table and opened his clipboard. Your blue spruce was in excellent health, he said. 18 years old, approximately 25 feet tall, 14-inch trunk diameter, no disease, no structural issues. He slid the report toward me. Using the International Society of Arboriculture valuation method, the replacement value is $23,400. I hadn't expected more than a few thousand. The number made my stomach tighten. Then he added almost casually, under California Civil Code 3346, if the destruction was intentional, damages can be tripled, $70,000. That was the moment the situation stopped being emotional and started being dangerous for Sandra. It also raised a question that had been bothering me since the chainsaw first started. Why would she take that risk? Bylaw 7.3 didn't apply to private property. Sandra knew that. She hadn't misunderstood the rules. She had twisted them on purpose. That afternoon, I called a friend who worked in real estate and asked him to pull public records on Sandra's house. He called back 2 hours later. She listed the property on December 1st, he said, asking $1.2 million. The listing highlights one thing over and over, an unobstructed mountain view from the master bedroom. My tree sat directly in that sightline. She hadn't cut it down for the HOA. She had cut it down because it was costing her money. And suddenly, the timing, the confidence, the lack of fear, it all made sense. The next step was documentation. I drove to the police station and filed a formal report for trespassing and vandalism. The officer warned me it would likely remain a civil issue, but I wanted a case number. Paper trails mattered, especially when someone believed they were untouchable. That night I started digging. I searched online forums, archived HOA complaints, and public court records. I wasn't looking for sympathy stories. I was looking for patterns, and then I found it. A sealed civil case from 3 years earlier. Different neighborhood, different HOA, same name, Sandra Whitfield. The case had settled quietly out of court. Confidentiality agreement. No details publicly available, but the behavior described in the complaint felt familiar. Fines, pressure, harassment, residents pushed to sell. She'd done this before. Just after midnight, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Checked the November meeting minutes. They were altered. I stared at the message for a long moment. Someone inside the HOA was reaching out. Someone who knew Sandra had crossed a line. I opened my laptop and downloaded every version of the HOA documents I could find. I compared PDFs line by line, checking timestamps, saving metadata. The next morning, I called my neighbor Harold Finch. I told him I knew his Ring camera faced my backyard. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said quietly, "Your father helped me fix my roof years ago. I won't pretend I didn't see what happened." He agreed to preserve the footage. That was when I understood this was no longer a dispute between neighbors. This was a case. On December 27th, the HOA secretary asked to meet me. We sat in a small coffee shop, both of us speaking quietly, like we were afraid the walls might listen. She slid a USB drive across the table. "These are the original November meeting minutes," she said, before Sandra changed them. I opened the files later that day and compared them to the version posted on the HOA website. The difference was unmistakable. An entire clause bylaw, 7.3 subsection 4, had been added after my tree was cut down. A clause granting the HOA president emergency authority to remove sightline obstructions. It hadn't existed before. Forgery. The next morning I sat in Harold Finch's living room. He pulled up the ring footage and we watched it together. Sandra walking into my yard. Sandra ordering the crew. Sandra dismissing the workers' concern about authorization. Then came the phone call. It's done. The view is clear. Update the listing photos. There was no room for interpretation. No ambiguity. She had admitted everything. That afternoon, my attorney watched the footage twice, without speaking. When it ended, he took off his glasses and set them on the desk. She confessed, he said, on camera, with motive. He laid out the consequences, civil damages, criminal exposure, insurance denial. Then he asked one question. How public do you want this? I didn't hesitate. The next HOA meeting, I said, in front of everyone. The meeting was scheduled for January 4th. Sandra had spent 12 years controlling that room. She had no idea it was about to turn on her. The Cedarbrook Heights Community Center had never been that full. 47 residents packed the room, some standing along the walls, others sitting on folding chairs pulled in from storage. I arrived 15 minutes early and still barely found a seat. Word had spread. People knew something was coming tonight. Sandra Whitfield called the meeting to order at exactly 7:00 p.m. Red blazer, pearl necklace. The same controlled posture she'd used for 12 years. She moved through agenda items quickly, brushing past questions, tightening her jaw whenever someone lingered too long. When she announced they would skip the open forum due to time constraints, I stood. Bylaw 3:2, I said. Every resident is guaranteed 5 minutes. The room went quiet. Sandra froze for half a second, just long enough for people to notice. Fine, she said sharply. Mr. Thorne, 5 minutes. I walked to the front, plugged my laptop into the projector, and faced the room. On December 14th, I said Sandra Whitfield entered my private property without permission and ordered a crew to cut down a tree my father planted 18 years ago. Sandra folded her arms. She claimed bylaw authority, I continued. She did not have it. I clicked the remote. A photo of my tree appeared on the screen, tall, decorated, alive. This was not a community issue, I said. It was personal. Sandra opened her mouth. I kept going. The next slide filled the screen. Sandra's real estate listing. Asking price $1.2 million. Highlighted feature unobstructed mountain view from master bedroom. Murmurs rippled through the room. My tree blocked that view, I said. That's why it was cut down. Sandra shook her head. I clicked again. 2 documents appeared side by side. On the left, the original November HOA meeting minutes. On the right, the version uploaded weeks later. I pointed to the highlighted section. This clause bylaw 7.3 subsection 4 did not exist until after my tree was destroyed. The room leaned forward. It grants the HOA president emergency authority to remove sightline obstructions, I said. It was added retroactively. That is forgery. Sandra stood abruptly. This meeting is out of order. One more piece of evidence, I said. I pressed play. The room went silent. They watched Sandra walk into my yard, heard her dismiss the workers' concern about authorization. Then they heard her voice on the phone. It's done. The view is clear. Update the listing photos. No spin, no interpretation, just her voice. When the video ended, no one spoke. Sandra's face had gone pale. This is slander, she said weakly. This footage is real, someone said from the back. Then another voice. And criminal. Douglas Finley stood up. She fined me 3 times for the wrong shade of white paint. Martha Holloway rose next. $400 for an unapproved flower pot. A third voice carried across the room. She pressured me to sell my house below market. I have the emails. Sandra backed away from the table. Robert Aldridge, the vice president, stood. I moved for an immediate vote of no confidence. The motion was seconded instantly. Hands went up across the room. 41 in favor, 3 opposed, 3 abstentions. Sandra Whitfield was removed as HOA president on the spot. She stood there for a long moment staring at the table like it might save her. Then she gathered her purse, turned, and walked toward the exit. No applause, no shouting, just silence. As the door closed behind her, I realized something. For the first time in 12 years, Sandra Whitfield had no authority left to hide behind. The Cedarbrook Heights Community Center was buzzing with tension long before the meeting officially began. 47 residents crowded the folding chairs, and dozens more lined the walls, leaning to catch a glimpse of Sandra Whitfield as she entered. The usual fluorescent hum seemed heavier tonight, carrying the weight of anticipation. I slipped into the third-row laptop and hand folder of evidence resting on my lap. People whispered, exchanged glances, tried to guess what would happen, but the room held a collective, almost electric stillness. At exactly 7:00 p.m., Sandra called the meeting to order. Charcoal blazer, pearls, the same precise posture she had perfected over 12 years. She moved briskly through the agenda, cutting off anyone who lingered on questions, tightening her jaw, as though her presence alone could control the room. Then she announced they would skip the open forum, citing time constraints. I stood immediately. Bylaw 3.2 guarantees every resident 5 minutes for open forum, I said. The chatter stopped. All eyes turned toward us. Sandra froze, lips tight, scanning the room, calculating. Finally, she said, "Fine, Mr. Thorne. 5 minutes." I walked to the front, connected my laptop to the projector, and faced the room. On December 14th, I began. Sandra Whitfield entered my private property without permission and ordered a crew to cut down a tree my father planted 18 years ago. My voice was steady, but inside, adrenaline surged. She claimed bylaw authority, I continued. She had none. Sandra folded her arms, but I kept going. This was the moment. The first time in 12 years, the room had its full attention, and I intended to use it. I clicked the remote and Sandra's real estate listing filled the screen. Asking price $1.2 million. Highlighted feature unobstructed mountain view from the master bedroom. A ripple of murmurs ran through the room. Faces turned. People began to connect dots. The tree she destroyed blocked that view, I said. This wasn't about community rules. It was personal profit. Sandra's fingers tightened around the table edge. I pressed on. 2 side-by-side documents appeared, the original November HOA meeting minutes on the left, the altered version on the right. I highlighted the addition of bylaw 7.3 subsection 4, granting the president emergency authority to remove sightline obstructions within 48 hours. That clause did not exist until after my tree was cut down, I said. This is forgery, retroactive justification to cover illegal action. The room leaned in. Sandra's mouth opened, then closed again. Finally, I said, pressing play on the Ring camera footage. The silence was absolute. Sandra walked onto my property. She waved off the worker, asking about authorization. She snapped her fingers. She laughed into the phone. "It's done. The view is clear. Update the listing photos. No ambiguity, no spin, just deliberate criminal actions, trespassing, vandalism, and forgery." I turned to the room. Under California law, she's liable for triple damages for willful destruction over $70,000. Unauthorized document alteration is felony forgery, and misdemeanor vandalism carries fines and possible jail time. Her insurance denies coverage because these were intentional acts. Every one of these violations is on record. Sandra's face went pale. She could no longer pretend this was administrative routine. Every action, every violation was documented and undeniable. Sandra's face had gone completely pale. Her arms, once folded confidently, now trembled at the edges of the table. The control she had wielded for 12 years, her aura of untouchable authority, crumbled in front of 47 witnesses. "This is slander," she stammered, voice tight. "This footage is real, Douglas," Finley said from his seat. "And criminal." Murmurs grew louder as others stood. Martha Holloway stepped forward. $400 for an unapproved flower pot, she said, her voice calm but firm. "And 3 times for repainting my fence, the wrong shade of white." Kenneth Webb added. "She pressured me to sell my home under market value. Emails prove it." Sandra's jaw tightened. Her glare flitted across the room, looking for allies. There were none. She realized the evidence the neighbors and the law had cornered her. Robert Aldridge, the vice president, stood motioning to the board. I moved for an immediate vote of no confidence. Seconded instantly. Hands shot up across the room. 41 in favor, 3 opposed, 3 abstentions. Sandra Whitfield was removed as HOA president on the spot. She froze, staring at the table as if it could save her, then mechanically gathered her purse and walked toward the exit. No shouting, no applause, just silence. When the door closed behind her, the room exhaled collectively. 12 years of unchecked control, manipulation, and fear had ended in 5 minutes. For the first time, everyone understood that Sandra was not above the law, and the system, the community, and the evidence had finally reclaimed their power.